So hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now this video will expand on a blog that I originally posted on my Patreon page, so thanks to all the patrons that support me over there, and thanks to everyone who got involved on the YouTube community feed, responding to my comments about bike tech after this weekend's Paris-Roubaix. And I thought it was really interesting to see people's opinions, whether they're kind of forward thinking based on technology or they still like the romance of the race and the luck element. Anyway, to give this video some context, and before we get into the real tech highlights and blunders of that race, and we're also going to look at what I think is the kind of ideal Paris-Roubaix concept bike later in the video, I want to give it some context. So I'm going to read through briefly a bit of the article that I posted on the website. I believe the brutality of the cobbled classic Paris-Roubaix, at least in the modern age, is only still relevant because of the bike tech or lack thereof. That said, small iterations of tech and tyre optimization see race editions getting faster and faster year on year. This year's race averaged 46.8 kilometers an hour, albeit with a tiny tailwind. But at what point does this race start to become irrelevant? With such high speeds, on paper, it could look like the average speed of any other flat road race or a well-drilled kermesse in northern France. My answer is, it will stay relevant because the bike industry ignores the fundamentals of vehicle dynamics. And that's why it's brutal. It has that romance, the roulette feeling of luck and destiny that has stuck with it for years. Great for TV, but really hard to watch as an engineer. Let's not forget, in 2022, we had our record number of punctures for a Paris-Roubaix, despite at the time being the fastest Roubaix on record, until this year that is. And on Sunday, we had 4 punctures between Wout van Aert and Laporte, 2 of the biggest favourites for the race and teammates. And in 2022, Wout also suffered a puncture that possibly denied him the race again, and Laporte's wheel collapsed in that race. If I was Wout or Laporte or any of these guys racing the pro peloton, racing life and limb, I would feel extremely dissatisfied, pretty pissed off and angry with this kind of, oh well, it's Paris-Roubaix attitude. The romantic among you will say bad luck while adjusting your bicorn hat. This is Paris-Roubaix. Statistically, however, it just doesn't add up. In what other performance vehicles do we use a rigid chassis and try to optimise rolling resistance, comfort, suspension, cornering and handling using tyre volume and pressure alone? Literally none. Imagine telling Max Verstappen, we're only going to adjust tyre pressure next year, we're not going to have any suspension because this black stuff on the whole looks pretty smooth. On that smooth tarmac, of which the cobbled classic Paris-Roubaix is 80%, lower pressures are directly proportional to going slower. You can't cheat the physics. At 3.5 bar, riders are losing up to 30 watts at 50 kilometers an hour just to be able to survive the cobbled sections. And it's worse than aero drag. Rolling resistance doesn't go away in the draft, it's always present. That's 30 joules per second for 6 hours just to get to the 20% of the race where you are at the mercy then of pure luck, where you may or may not pinch, sever or burp a tyre. Burping a tyre is a new evil not seen in the tubular days, and that's something we'll come on to later. Does this sound absurd yet? The irony is, if a bike were to be developed that it was so well optimised for both conditions, the race would no longer be brutal, no longer hell of the north, it would just be a flat stage in France. Such a bike would also probably be quite heavy and overcomplicated for the rest of the season, and it wouldn't be a commercial solution or product for any of the brands willing to sponsor cycling. We'll take a punt at what the bike may look like later in the video. Let's look at some of the tech highlights and blunders in this race. Now we'll start with the tyres, considering we've been talking about that. Vittoria Corsa Pros. This unreleased pro-issue tyre suffered many more punctures than any other tyre in the race, especially the Conti TRs. From my table here, we can see that around 33% of the pro peloton are on Vittoria and about 40% were on Contis. Now, there were some pro Conti teams that aren't in my table that were kind of filling in the gaps, but majority is about 33% Vittoria. Yet more than half of the punctures in the race, from what I can tell from watching the 6 hours of footage, were on Vittorias. The race result was sealed on a puncture, if you'll excuse the pun, with Wout van Aert clearly up for a ding-dong with Van der Poel in the closing stages, puncturing with around 15 kilometres to go. Now, some claim that Van der Poel won on 28mm tyres because he actually started the race on 28mm Corsa Pros, I believe, or they may have even been tubs. But he did do a cheeky bike change after about the first 100 kilometres, I believe, to take a bike on 32s, which I thought was quite smart. I didn't see many other riders doing that. Wout had then even an earlier puncture before his race-losing puncture, despite running tyre inserts, and so did Laporte, the other jumbo favourite. This wouldn't happen so often if the bikes didn't need to mitigate the suspension losses dropping to such low pressures to survive the cobbles. I hope you agree now, statistically, it is ludicrously risky for their aggressive riding styles. They may test those pressures in testing and in recons, but in the race, as you know, if you've ever raced, your riding style is just so much more aggressive. Everything's more frantic, and maybe they didn't test for those conditions and they should have upped the pressure a bit. Wout's final puncture, I'm pretty sure, happened right here on this left-hander. Having just gapped Van der Poel in the mix-up of the Degenkolb crash, he just hits this lip of cobbles, this exposed cobbles, after the dirt apex. Just too hard for the pressure he's running. In the live feed, I remember seeing and hearing a very harsh impact and a bit of a bang there. And that brings me on to the next point. The failure modes of tubeless. Now, we didn't have these in the olden days, and I alluded to this earlier. While being able to seal tiny pinpricks, a tubeless tyre with its sealant, of which I don't think Paris-Roubaix actually poses a big risk, tubeless tyres have the additional failure mode of burping and a sudden loss of air. This doesn't happen with tubes or tubulars. You trade off pinch flat risks for burping risks. No sealant or insert is going to help with that when the air is suddenly ejected and you can't get it back in one big burp. Something else I'm just going to highlight, I thought was quite funny, this is not really an important point, but the €15,000 Bianchi Superbike goes noob issue with the bars and stem for Paris-Roubaix. From what I saw, all RKS Samsic riders were using noob-esque flipped up aluminium stems and traditional round bars due to the one-piece Bianchi bars proclivity of snapping in rough conditions like they did in a recent race. Such an expensive bike with aero marketing drivel till the cows come home must change its entire front end to mitigate the worry of snappages. Ridiculous. Why don't they use mountain bike SPD pedals? Why are they not used? I've seen at least 2 riders, and maybe I'll put the names in later or someone can let me know down below, names TBC, were dropped from their respective groups because they couldn't clip back in after unclipping on the cobbles. Looking down, trying to turn the pedal over to clip in on the right side whilst being rattled on your pelvis by Satan's washing machine. They just lost enough seconds to be distanced from their groups and they couldn't get back in. And it was au revoir for them. They could not get back in, race over. A mountain bike SPD pedal, stamp on it, any side and go. The race is flat, weight does not matter. Now, there are a few caveats with that. The whole team has to do it in case you pick up your teammate's bike or a spare bike, and also the neutral service has to do it as well. So it's not really going to happen unless every team does it, and then there is no real advantage. So a bit of a weird one, that. It was just a thought. Moving on, Canyon. Van der Poel, Mathieu van der Poel, being one of the best bike riders that have ever lived, has literally carried this brand through all the shit they brought on themselves with the new Air Road. They literally owe him everything. Would anyone be buying one of the Air Road clunkers with all the problems that it had? Finally, they admit the Air Road seat post design was fucked and they didn't have the skill to make it work. For weeks now, Van der Poel has been riding a reworked Air Road with a completely rigid seat clamp interface at the top tube. Gone is the deflection, the rubbing, the clicking, and the erosion of the simply supported beam arrangement of the lower down clamp. The original marketing pitch was adulatory, highly compliant seat post giving a lot more comfort. That's gone now. So we're back to somewhere worse than the previous 2015 Air Road. Yes, that's 8 years ago, that had a very comfy skinny seat post, was an aerodynamic benchmark and had really no proprietary components. Yay, that's bike industry development. On the fly tyre pressure adjustment, I'm surprised these systems used by DSM and Jumbo were not more popular. They go a long way to fixing some of the tyre pressure compromises set out previously, but what about the drag cost of recharging the compressors? Apparently the pump can be disengaged via a clutch system, particularly on the Jumbo one I think, from the front wheel, so there is zero power loss when not recharging. Obviously you've got the weight to deal with, but on the flat it doesn't really matter. If the road scene wasn't so stuck in their ways when it comes to embracing new tech, I think a lot more riders would be using this and proving its worth, and certainly mitigating that drag loss from running such a low pressure on the smooth at 80% of the race. So, what would an ideal Roubaix bike look like? Well, let's just think for a moment before I show you my concept about vibration losses, vibration attenuation, and how we currently don't deal with them properly at all in cycling. Now, so you know I'm not going to bullshit you, I'm actually going to read from my Vehicle Dynamics textbook here. So I'm going to read you a little bit of an excerpt from Vehicle Dynamics textbook that I was studying whilst doing, motorsport design in one of my years at university, and this is about human-powered vehicles on pavé roads, so pretty damn relevant. So let me just shift it over it. Right, when a human-powered vehicle transitions from a smooth surface to a pavé road, the forward kinetic energy of the system gets converted into other forms of energy. The vibrations caused by the uneven surface of the pavé generates oscillations that propagate through the vehicle and the rider or occupant's body. These oscillations are absorbed by the muscles and tissues of the rider, resulting in vibrational losses. The energy that was once used to move the vehicle and rider or occupant's body forward is now being dissipated as heat within the rider or occupant's body. The muscle tissues of the rider or occupant act as a damping system, absorbing the energy of the vibrations and converting them into thermal energy. The greater the amplitude and the frequency of the oscillations, the rougher the cobbles, the more energy is dissipated as heat through the damping action of the muscles and tissues. Thus, if the mass of the system remains constant, a resulting velocity decrease will occur as the vehicle transitions onto the pavé road. Furthermore, fatigue is onset into the rider or occupant as vibrations cause small, involuntary muscle contractions, causing an increased consumption of the body's chemical energy. Need I say more? Please, let's start paying attention to vibration losses. Let's take a little look at my concept bike. Now, this is a bastard Franken bike, but I really think this could work really well optimized for Paris-Roubaix. Now, no company's going to make this because they don't want to make a bike for one race per year. Yes, I've said this before, I think the teams are doing the best with the equipment they have, but the equipment they have is not the best for this race. So what do you think my ideal Paris-Roubaix bike would look like? Well, the design would start with a lot of data collection of vibrational losses and attenuation, and I hope to present to you another video in the future regarding this, which is going to be a separate study. But that data would then feed into some type of computational optimization simulation, very similar to those used in motorsport. But so far, I see tyres between 32 and 35, so not really much different to what we have now, but at a much higher pressure than the 3.5 bar we currently see. So they are not, penalised on those 80% of the smooth part of the race. At least 40 millimeters of supple travel at each end, fully damped and fully locked out for the smooth asphalt sections, and that is really important. It has to be fully locked out. Full aerodynamic fairing and integration of the shocks at both ends. Weight is not important, so I don't really care about the weight of those because it's a flat race. And actually, on a road bike with such lightweight wheel components, lightweight rims, lightweight hubs, spokes, discs, the unsprung to sprung mass ratio of any vehicle is probably one of the best of any vehicle. Much better than a mountain bike, much better than a motorbike, because our carbon road wheels are so light. The suspension of a road bike with a very, very lightweight wheel set could work exceedingly well because this sprung mass, being the bike and the rider, is quite heavy, relatively speaking. So what we're talking about here is the optimization becomes watts per CDA with minimal vibration losses and fatigue to the rider. All of this is possible. Not possible with the current bikes. Commercially though, it ain't going to happen unless someone wants me to back me to make this bike for one race a year. Wattage savings, we'll have recovered the 30 watts lost for not riding at 3.5 bar on smooth tarmac, and then we'll make the more gains regarding the suspension losses on the cobbles. Those gains in terms of thermal energy and muscle tissue vibration is something that's just kind of impossible for the layman to measure. A lot of that would have to be empirical testing. Now, when I say suspension losses, like I said, reading from the book, this is the literal energy conversion of your forward kinetic energy into your very own muscles and tissues of your body. Now, your body is 70% water. The body is a very good damper. And those losses are unrecoverable once they've gone into your body. 40 millimeters of damped tuned suspension versus 15 millimeters of undamped tire deflection, which has losses associated with it on its own. Yes, please. Now, the difficult part will be designing a suspension kinematic that works really, really well with high level of anti-squat, because the unique thing about Paris-Roubaix is that when the riders are hitting the cobbles, they're always pedaling, and they're pedaling hard. Their power will probably go up 20-30% from this transition before they get to the cobbles. As soon as they hit the cobbles, they'll probably drop it down a few gears, lower the cadence, and really put the power out. Now, normally on a bike, on a mountain bike, you have something called anti-squat, which is trying to open the suspension as you're pedaling, and that's to stop pedal bob. But you kind of don't really want that on the cobbles because you want the suspension to be very active when you're pedaling. But then again, you don't want it to bob. So the anti-squat tuning will be very difficult for this, I agree. So, quick look at the crazy bike then. We've got two shocks at both ends. The front end is a lefty style fork, which is great because you've got basically half the aerodynamic losses as a normal fork. If you could turn that fork upper into a monocoque, an airfoil shape, and fair the stanchion at the bottom with a simple plastic or carbon fairing, airfoil shaped, again, you have very, very, very low drag front fork, and it's one-sided. That's all you need. Wheel change might be a little bit difficult with disc alignment to do very quickly, but hopefully you won't get a puncture with this system because we've mitigated those risks from running such low tyre pressures. At the back, we've got semi-integrated single pivot and rocker design. Yeah, this is all very Photoshop, as you can see, but this is my concept with the Fox shock hidden away in the frame there and a little rocker. We've filled in that part of the frame for aerodynamic reasons. We've got extended the seat tube out the back a bit to fare the rear wheel with just enough cut out for the rear wheel travel. And yeah, everything's aerodynamically fared. We've got high pressure 35mm tyres running probably about 65 psi, so super high pressure, and we're going to have the suspension very, very supple when it comes to the off-road parts, the cobbles, and then fully locked out when we're back on the smooth asphalt, which is like the first 100k, the first 80% of the race as well. So this is my concept. I hope you enjoyed that. If anyone wants to make it, please fund me. Now, I'm sure there are more things I forgot to mention from this race. Let me know down below. On a tactical note, I think it was very clever from Jumbo to attempt to kind of decoy bridge Laporte across to the Wout van Aert lead group. I think they wanted to actually dangle them out there in between for as long as possible, knowing that Wout had the best chance in the lead, and it absolutely killed the chase from the peloton behind. Maybe that's a bit far-fetched, but let me know what you think down below. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.